Some years ago, I asked the young people in our church to draw a picture of church. And one person drew a church building and then a group of people, and he put a cross on the church building and he put a big tick on the group of people, the crowd of people. Another child just wrote, "Church is people." And of course, both of them were spot on, because the church, according to the New Testament, is a group of people, just a group of people. But there is a lot of confusion today about that word church. People wonder whether it is, they ask the question, what is the church? Is it an organization? Is it a building? They ask, are all churches true? They ask, do you have to belong to a church in order to be a real Christian? And I think a lot of those questions have come to the surface in the present pandemic. So there could hardly be a more relevant topic for us to talk about on July the 26th, 2020, than what is the church? As you know, we're making our way through the Apostles' Creed, a lovely summary of the Christian faith in this series of teaching or doctrine sermons. And today we've arrived at this line: I believe in the Holy Universal Church, the communion of saints. I believe in the Holy Universal Church, the communion of saints. Now, in those lines, there may be a little bit of confusion. So let's clarify it. The word saint can be confusing to some. In the Bible, the word saint is used to describe every single Christian, not just a few special Christians. So Paul writes to the Ephesian church, to the saints at Ephesus, all of you are saints if you're a believer in Jesus Christ. The other word that might be a little confusing is communion. Here Paul is not talking about the Eucharist or the Lord's table. Communion of saints means sharing with, fellowship with, being part of a loving community. So when a Christian affirms, I believe in the Holy Universal Church, the communion of saints, what are they affirming? Well, I think we can put it in three B's. They believe in the universal church of Jesus Christ. They belong to a local church. And thirdly, they bow to their local church. I'll explain what that means in a moment. So the first B, I believe in the universal church of Jesus Christ. A Christian is a man or a woman or a boy or a girl who believes in this vast community of people stretching right across time, right across space, who all together are called the church, the universal church. You see, in the New Testament, the word church is used in two different ways. Sometimes it's used small c, small church, to describe local congregations. So Manor Park Church in Worcester, where we come from, would be one of those congregations. Here, for example, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 2, to the church of God in Corinth. The word church refers to that congregation. But sometimes the word church is used, capital C, to describe the whole universal church. Jesus Christ is the head of the body, the church. Colossians chapter 1, 18. And here Paul is not talking about a little church in Colossae. He's talking about that universal body of believers that stretches across time and space and includes everyone who has been called by God, everyone who has responded to the gospel. And as I say, Christians believe in this one church which crosses all divisions and time. When my eldest son left home to live in Sunderland for a few years, someone said to me before he left, "Isn't it good to belong to a global family which has members in every city of the world?" Perhaps she should have said almost every city of the world, but she was right. And you know what we were able to do? We were able to phone up some members of that global family who lived in Sunderland. We didn't know them. They were total strangers, but they were brothers and sisters. And we were able to ask them if they would look after our faraway son for the next few years. And they did. What a wonderful thing it is to belong to a numberless worldwide family of brothers and sisters from every nation, every tribe, every people, and every language, spanning from Adam all the way to the last person to believe just before Jesus returns. Billions upon billions in this global capital C church. I was really sad to read only this month that Minkai and Queda died at the ripe old age of 90. I have read so much about him and seen him in films. Some of you will know the story, along with other members of a very fearsome Ecuadorian tribe called the Auca Indians. Minkai killed 5 missionaries in January 1965 with spears. But then he became a Christian himself. A wonderful testimony, a wonderful story. And he is a member of this one universal global Church of Jesus Christ. He's my brother in Christ. And I'm really looking forward to the day when I'll meet him in heaven one day. Still talking about this big church, capital C, universal church, we believe that Jesus Christ is the head of the universal church. The Pope is not the head of the church. The Archbishop of Canterbury is not the head of the church. The Queen is not the head of the church. Jesus Christ, and he alone, is the head of the church, which he himself purchased with his own blood. Christ is the head of the church. Ephesians 5:22. And local churches acknowledge, who are part of this great universal church, acknowledge the headship of Jesus Christ by believing in his word, the Bible, by preaching his gospel to the world, and by obeying his good and holy commands. Jesus is the head of the church, this universal church. And just one more thing about this global capital C church. The Creed calls it the Holy Universal Church. And so we believe that this universal church should be holy. Now here's a little Greek lesson. The word church, English word church, is a translation of the Greek word ecclesia. Ecclesia is made up of 2 words, ek, out of, and kaleo, called. The church is composed of people who have been called out of the world by God's wonderful grace to become his own holy people. The world is here, and the Church of Jesus Christ is here, and they are both very different. You are, says Peter, a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness, that's out of the world, and into his wonderful light. 1 Peter 2:9. And so the Holy Universal Church is called to live holy and distinctive lives. Our thinking is to be so different from the world. Our lifestyle is to be so different from the world, just as our destination is different from the world. In fact, we are so different from the world, the universal church and the world. We are so different that Peter calls us strangers in the world. And an old translation uses the word alien, which would probably be misunderstood today, but you get the picture. To God's, he's writing a letter to God's elect, God's chosen ones, strangers in the world. The universal church, made up of little congregations, is to be holy, and as a result they will be strangers in the world. If you've ever lived in a culture different from your own, you'll know how this feels. I know friends who never quite feel at home in England because they're from a different country. And I wonder, maybe I'm speaking to a young Christian this morning, and you're beginning to feel that more and more with every passing day. You just are drifting away from your old friends. You find less and less in common with them. And I want to say to you, that's normal. You now belong to the holy universe, the holy, the different, the distinctive universal church. And it's normal for you to feel that way as the years pass by. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door. And here's the line I want to share with you. And I can't feel at home in this world anymore. We are God's holy universal church. So, when a Christian says, I believe in the church, the first thing they're saying is, I believe in that one universal church which stretches right across the world today in every country, and then all the way backwards in time to Adam, and all the way forward in time to the last person to be converted, and encompasses everyone God has called from every country, nation, tribe, and people. It's a wonderful thing, this thing called the church. But more than that, my second B this morning is, when I say I believe in the holy universal church, I am also affirming that I belong to a local church. I don't only believe in this great global church, capital C. I believe it is made up of lots of tiny little congregations, thousands, all over the world. And I believe in local churches. Some years ago, a friend of mine gave me a letter he had received in the post, and it had some money in it. And I looked for it this week. I couldn't find it somewhere among my possessions. And it came from an anonymous Christian couple who lived in his city. And they wanted to give away some of their money each month. That they wanted to, Christians call it tithe. They didn't want to keep all their money. They wanted to give it away a little bit. But because they didn't belong to a local church, they just randomly went through the directory of their city every month in their area, and they wrote that person a lovely letter along with a gift. They didn't believe in the local church. I don't know why. Maybe they had been hurt in the past, or maybe they'd never really been taught well. But the Christianity of the Bible is all based around local churches. To the 7 churches, John writes, in the province of Asia, Revelation chapter 1. We want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches, all those little churches in the region of Macedonia, writes Paul in 2 Corinthians 8. Christians believe in local churches. It doesn't matter where they meet. Manor Park Church meets in a school. Our daughter church meets in a community center. The local church can meet anywhere. A church is a local group of believers who meet in a school, a hall, a building, open air, theatre, and we must say this, most especially in homes. That is where all the churches of the New Testament met. And so a Christian believes in the global church and then believes in the local church, and you can't believe in the local church unless you belong to a local church. All the Christians in the New Testament belong to individual little local churches. Euodia, Syntyche, Phoebe, Rufus, Junius, all of them. None of them are alone, are on their own. Now suppose someone claimed that they were a footballer to you or to me. And so you and I, we began to quiz them. We asked them, who do you play for? When does your team practice? What was the score in your last game? How many goals either side? And so on. And then they come back to us and they said to us, to you and me, they said, I don't belong to a team. I just kick a ball against a wall on my own. Now, what would you say? And what would I say to them? We would all say that that young man, if it was a man, was in error. Because football, by definition, is a team game. You can't play football on your own. And it's exactly the same way with Christianity. It is impossible to be a New Testament Christian and not belong to a local church. And so can I just ask our listeners out there, do you belong to a local church? If not, there's either something deficient in your thinking, your doctrine, which you need to correct, or there's something lacking in your obedience. You know you should, but you're not yet committing. And so I would urge you to connect to a Bible-believing church as soon as you can. Make sure it's a Bible-believing church. Not all churches believe the Bible, but you want one that preaches, that loves, that honors God's word. We all need one another. The Christian life is too tough to do it on our own. To encourage, to comfort, to teach, rebuke, strengthen, pray for, and just stir each other up to love and good works. Let us not, says the writer of Hebrews, give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let's encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Hebrews chapter 10. So, when we say, I believe in the church, we mean big church, capital C church. I believe in that one universal church spreading across time and space. And then we mean small church, little church. I belong to one of the expressions of that universal church, and it's local, my local church. We believe, we belong, and thirdly, the third B, we bow. We bow to our local church. Now, bow isn't the right word, but I couldn't find a word that began with the letter B that means submit to, agree with, live in harmony with. And this last point, that a Christian is somebody who submits to a local church, is really important, because we live in a consumer society. And it's very easy for any one of us to treat the local church as we might treat a supermarket. Some people do that. And if you don't like the products, you move on. But that is never a Christian attitude to the church. It's all too common, particularly I think in the West, for a Christian to attend a church for a few years, and then maybe they fall out with somebody, or they discover that the church doesn't believe exactly what they do, or they discover the church isn't perfect, and so they leave. And there's something really wrong in their thinking. They have absorbed the individualistic philosophical spirit of our Western culture, which comes from the so-called Enlightenment. It was not an enlightenment at all in Christian terms. Rather than absorbing, they've been influenced by the Enlightenment. They don't know that. They've just absorbed it from the culture in which they live, rather than being influenced and absorbing the sweet humility and the gentle submissiveness of Jesus. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, Ephesians 5. Obey your leaders and submit to their authority, Hebrews 13. Those are very unpopular words in our culture, aren't they? But then the church is very different from the world. It's beautifully different from the world. We submit to Christ, our loving head, and we submit to one another, and we submit to our leaders out of reverence to Christ. So when a Christian says, I believe in the Holy Universal Church and the communion of saints, they mean B, 1, I believe in the immense sea of people from every tribe and nation with Jesus as its head. B, 2, I belong to a local expression of that church. And in that local church, B, 3, I bow, I am submissive, I am agreeable out of reverence for Christ. Now, we live in very strange days, don't we? And so I just want to leave you as we end this sermon on the church in coronavirus era, in this pandemic. I want to leave you with 3 very practical church guidelines for this season in which we live. And I want you to take them on board and listen. I think this is how we can apply all the teaching of the Bible to our unusual days. Here's the first thing I would encourage everyone. Maintain the discipline of meeting every Sunday morning with God's people. I know it's virtual. I know it's in front of the telly. But don't get out of the good habit of gathering every Sunday morning for local church. That's the first piece of advice. And then when we are able to all meet together, you'll just slip right back into pattern. The second thing I'd encourage us all is to meet with one another in home groups. Most of us do that. Zoom isn't as good as real life, but it is far better than nothing. And I know some folk really struggle with Zoom. But if you don't like being seen, and some of us don't, we can turn the camera off and we can just listen in and we can watch everyone else. And I would really encourage God's people to persevere. We've got probably another 6 months of this. Persevere in our home groups. Persevere Sunday morning. Persevere on Sunday in your home groups. And thirdly, meet up with other Christians in person for fellowship, in back gardens, in public spaces, as the law now permits. I myself have set up a gazebo in my back garden for the summer, and it's my new meeting place. May I encourage you, don't wait for others to take the lead. You take that initiative and arrange to meet up with 1 or 2. And do you know what Jesus did? When he began his ministry, he chose 12 men around him because he wanted them. He knew he needed fellowship. He took the initiative. And you and I should do that. And I think especially while the summer weather permits. You know, very soon, autumn will arrive and winter will set in, and we'll lose these lovely evenings and days when we can sit outside and actually see one another in person. And I think we should all pray that God will give to wisdom and insight to the scientists who are working on a vaccine so that we'll find one soon. Now, maybe you have been asking all this morning, how do I join the church? Here it is, Acts 2. Repent and be baptized. That's what Peter said. And then we read this. Those who accepted his message, those who repented and were baptized, 3,000 were added to their number that day. Those who accepted his message were baptized, and 3,000 were added to the church that day. We enter the church by repenting, believing, and being baptized. And you can do that even today.